for years and years, you can imagine how utterly addicted. I mean, hope is the crack cocaine of the palliative care community, really.
You know, every time I speak with you on the phone, you're very up to date on what's going on in the world. And I'm wondering how you stay informed and aware of the destruction and collapse and still keep your heart open. How do you keep yourself inspired, Andrew?
First of all, thank you for saying that I am well up on things, because I think that's actually a responsibility of our time. So many people.
What specific effects of climate change, habitat destruction, or human systems collapse are you imagining occurring that would affect you and your loved ones or your community?
I mean, in many ways, I've been tracking habitat shifts throughout my lifetime. Just tracking in one area of Maine that I've gone to every summer since I was a child, tracking the loss of species in the ocean throughout my lifetime. It's been pretty radical in the last.
And so I went to fill that gap, and this is a long way of saying that I think that you talking about this culture being suicidal is desperately important.
So it's demanding urgent action. You know, there should be red lights everywhere. You know, alarms that should be going off. But it seems people think it's not happening, or it's a joke, or it's a fantasy, or a delusion. I have no idea, but I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, and that's.
Hello, Janaia. It's really good to be with you today. Thank you for joining us on this symposium.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
We're really excited to have you in this group of folks who are doing something different in terms of a symposium online. We're really trying to avoid just giving information. And we've chosen particular people because we know that they will be speaking from their hearts. And I know that you will be today. So I don't have to tell you, of course, the status of our planet, our predicament that we're dealing with. You and Robin have been conducting interviews for years on Peak Moment TV and giving us options and inspiration for how to live resiliently in the face of all this. But I want to ask you, first of all, how did you come to the perspective that you have now?
It actually started back in about 1968, and I read Edgar Cayce's Earth Changes. He was a clairvoyant, and he had some prophecies, and the one that drew my interest as a Californian was California entirely covered with water except for a few mountaintops peeking up. And I thought, how could this happen? How could we have the oceans rise? Or it must be very, very far off in some other time. And about a decade later, I actually wrote an article about that, and also learned that the 1970s were the hottest decade so far in the 20th century. So those are sort of my early clues. But the real conclusive point happened in 1989 when Robin and I read aloud Joe McKibben's The End of Nature. And since my paths have been sort of spiritual journey and environment, that was so clear that I could feel it, and it was real. We called it global warming then.
Right.
So that's where the picture of the global, warming climate disruption started at that point. Jump ahead to about 2005, and what got on my radar was Kunstler's The Long Emergency and the documentary The End of Suburbia.
Yes.
Which came at the same time at a town hall in my community. We brought out someone who actually, Steve Andrews, who actually talked to us about peak oil. Those things sort of they sort of like felt to me that people wouldn't change their behavior just knowing about climate change, but if it hit our wallets, in terms of reduced oil supplies, gasoline supplies, then we might make the necessary changes to reduce our load on the planet. So I helped to co-found a local relocalization group to educate our community. And it was in that time that Peak Moment TV was born. So along the way, the other kind of influences that a lot of reading that spoke to me were James Lovelock's The Revenge of Gaia, which we got in about 06, 07. And we were reading David Corton on The Great Turning and Richard Heinberg on Peak Everything. I think the political side came in a little more differently, actually, I should add, around that same time, From the Wilderness with Mike Rupert.
Yes.
And that's where we met you. And that's
right.
where I started reading your essays that I really liked, because they weren't just about the politics and so on. You were about people and our psyches. So that's why I've been with you since then, actually. So the political picture, the part of collapse, is the collapse of industrial civilization, has come along with things like Peak Everything. I didn't read Limits to Growth, but that certainly is, an underlay. The whole 9/11, all unanswered questions about it, sort of got me, and learning about how money works. Seeing the money masters. So that added the industrial civilization political collapse sort of picture. And more recently, I've been following some of Guy McPherson, who's been on our show, and Alex Smith at Radio EcoShock. So that's how I've gotten immersed in it.
What an education for you, Rob.
Whoa, no kidding. Yeah.
Well, what specifics of climate change, habitat destruction, or human systems collapse are you imagining that will occur, that will affect you, your loved ones, and your community?
Some of them are already occurring. Robin and I just came back from 19 months up in the Pacific Northwest videoing Peak Moment shows, and have come back to our well much lower than it used to be. Our wells are going dry. So we're feeling the California drought.
Yes.
Very keenly. And of course, my loved ones, neither of us have children, and so I'm paying attention to what's happening for my mom and my sister and family in the Bay Area who are having to conserve water. So the drought is very real and present. The other piece that's constantly here in the Sierra Nevada foothills where I live is wildfire.
Yes.
In fact, there was a recent wildfire a small distance away. So, and the smoke coming from other fires in Northern California. So it's already here.
Yes.
As far as affecting me and loved ones and our community. I mean, we have people that are on fire alert who are paying attention. We have a website where that's their primary focus, so that we're as a community more vigilant about, lightning strikes or runway fires. It's already here.
Yeah. Today, as we are talking, if I look out the window, I can see the smoke from the Washington, Montana, California, Utah fires. It's permeating Boulder. Can't smell it very much, but can certainly see it. And this is happening really almost every summer. And now there's many millions of acres on fire, even as we're sitting here talking. The governor of Washington yesterday or the day before called this a cataclysmic event. And I've not heard a public official use those terms, perhaps since Katrina.
Yes, it seems like everything is ratcheted up. I mean, obviously through your news and digest, you're looking around the world watching flooding or worse winters in the Northeast and so on. These are immediate. You also asked about human systems collapse affecting
Yes.
And certainly I can see the squeezing and pinching relative to healthcare payments. Robin has chronic Lyme. It's not covered at all by insurance. So I see that breakdown. I can also, we also see infrastructure. I imagine in a short while, infrastructure breakdowns. Those of us who live in the periphery, in the rural areas, are not going to have the same kind of service, and don't have the same kind of service, say, for internet or electricity. Now we're in a pretty good position because we're off grid. So we're supplying, and we have supply our own water. So we're supplying some of our own utilities. So we have a little bit of resilience there. But I see it affecting my whole community, actually, and beyond. One or two bridges out, and we've lost our supply line for food and other supplies. We're vulnerable in the gold country here. So those are also things that I am watching and sensing may well happen.
So, what is it like for you to know and feel all of this? You know, increasingly this is going to affect all of your future plans and hopes and dreams in many ways, already is. Well, what's it like for you to know and feel all of this, and how are you responding to it in your life?
Take a deep breath.
Yes.
That's a big question, and I have to start on the feeling level, which is a great deal of grief.
Yes.
I'm watching. Rob and I are privileged to have lived the last 25 years within a natural community. We're on 160 acres, surrounded by public recreation lands and forests, so we're almost a little island. And we have, in those 25 years, become part of the natural community. I mean, I know who our bird sounds are, and we watch that bear is living only, 100 feet away at the pond. So there's this huge privilege that I have, and I'm noticing the birds that haven't returned when they migrate through in the spring.
Yes.
And I'm noticing the spawning salmon that couldn't make it all. They had to truck them back up our river because of the low water levels. So I'm observing those changes in my just immediate surroundings, and and writ large, it's a grief that feels very big to me. So there's sorrow, and at times fear and anxiety. Do we stay here in wildfire country? How do we respond? And there is also increased gratitude. It's like the two-edged sword. It's like on the other side of all of that grief, I am so grateful for the birds that do show up.
Yes.
For even the rattlesnake who said hello across the trail.
Right.
I'm grateful they're still here and adapting as best they can. And the people who are working to mitigate this as best they can, I'm grateful for these precious moments. So in terms of responses, one big thing is that Robin and I set up to do Peak Moment TV. It was like a way that gave us something constructive to do. I mean, the first question that arrived at Peak Oil for me was, how are other people in other communities responding to this? How are we going to feed ourselves? Was my fears go to, how do we eat?
Sure.
So we set out in 2006 and have done trips in 2010 and then just 13 and 14 into the Pacific Northwest so far to see answers to those questions. I'm not looking for solutions. I think it's a predicament, as you've said. But I do see that there are lots of people who are doing creative, constructive things now. And that gives me a great deal of energy. The Peak Moment is a piece of that. We're now at almost 300 shows, which astounds us.
Wow.
People doing alternate currencies, people doing permaculture, and putting in plants from different zones so that they can be anticipating as it gets warmer, as it changes, or drier, or whatever.
Yes.
people doing natural building, people sharing more, people teaching kids how to be in the garden and to eat well and so on. So that's, I must say that that's a lifeline.
Yes, absolutely.
What else we're doing in response? We are, the universe has been underneath our wings, helping us along. Our tenant of 4 years asked to buy our house, so that frees us to go where we're needed. And
Right.
we haven't a clue where that is next, but we'll know. I mean, I've watched how the universe has been very kind to provide direction at certain points, and I trust, it will continue to happen. Let me look at my notes. I had other responses. One of the things that we did in terms of the habitat loss that you have also mentioned actually goes to one of my most heart-opening moments. A couple of years after we moved to our land, our forest land, our homestead, a adjoining neighbor, logged all of the biggest trees off his parcel. Day after day, I would hear the thump. I have a feeling for trees, the big conifer trees.
Yes.
I imagined as a child living inside of one. It was safe and nurturing. So for days, for that week when he was logging, all I could feel was that those elders and all the wisdom those trees have in the network and their roots going out to all the other trees in the forest would be gone.
Yes.
It was heartrending. And one of the blessings that came out of that is an idea that Robin had. What if we could protect all of the land, the 4 40-acre parcels around us, for wildlife, for habitat? And we did that. That in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I wrote a poem that I want to read a little piece of, that was our promise to the trees. Our easements say they can't cut the largest third of the trees so that we can approximate an old growth forest.
By all means, please read.
Read this. It's just a short part of a poem called "They Will Not Cut You Down." And I talk about the death of a tree or trees in the woods. Your death brings only the small grief. It is a death before your time that brings our large grief. This large grief is a loss echoed now all over the earth. Ancient forests and young, Gaia's breath cut down. Our grief is so big we all may drown. Here on this land, Lone Bobcat Woods, we promise you, long after we are gone, we will not cut you down. So that feels to me like one of the most important responses we've done to this change, is to give life to the wilder.
Thank you so much for reading that, and thank you for what you are doing for the land. That's beautiful, Janaia. Really beautiful. I'm wondering, you've sort of shared this, but I'm wondering if there was one particular heart-opening moment that you recall in the process of waking up to this reality.
There's two others that come to mind. One was slower, is we read The Revenge of Gaia from Lovelock, and
Right.
It's a science so real and so convincing that it was like it's not a matter of opinion. The disruptive climate is happening, and there were enough things starting by then that it was believable. I was in sorrow for months as we read this. It was just walking grief, trying to hold, and not being able to even imagine all the effects that it might have everywhere.
Right.
But that was just a sort of a constant, sort of always open, raw moment. Another that's more personal was as we were building our the infrastructure around our house. We had in 1990 we had dug trenches for water and electricity and so on. And Mama Turkey came by, and some of the little turkey chicks fell into the trench, and they couldn't get out. And we rescued them, and we tried to feed them, and it didn't work. And within a few days, they died. And it seemed the most fitting symbol of a little action, the unintended consequences, but how much our human activity is negatively impacting so many others of our non-human companions and human companions. Mm-hmm. That made me so aware of little actions that we don't even know what they're going to do are all affecting this whole web of life. I felt so connected.
Well, that leads me to another question that I want to ask, which is, I know that you're a subscriber to my daily news digest, but beyond that, I wonder how you stay informed and aware of the destruction and collapse. You've certainly shared some of your own personal experiences. But the thing is, how do you stay aware of this and keep your heart open? How do you keep yourself inspired?
Well, I'll first claim that I don't know that I can keep my heart open all the time. I don't think that's quite...
That's right, and that's not realistic. No, of course.
I think I go in and out, actually.
Yes, yes.
I'm informed by not doing TV, by not doing radio, by not doing mainstream media, because they're not telling us the whole story. I am extremely grateful for the internet, and I filter that. I filter it based on sort of where am I, what kind of mood, if you will, or added space am I in right now. If I'm really feeling down or stressed, there are some weeks, Carolyn, when I never look at your news.
Right.
Because I just can't take it in.
Right.
And there are other times when I read a little bit every day, and I link to those things. I mean, you're one of the important things for me is to filter that information. And so I'm very grateful for a digest like yours. And since many of the things we're on the same wavelength, you do a great service to me so that I can just link to those things that matter or go further. But I also keep an eye on Alex Smith's Radio Eco Shock. I keep a word out for some positive news from Charles Eisenstein, who's trying to frame a different, a more positive, future. I mostly read. I don't watch video very much. Ironically, we produce video, but we have very intermittent, sparse service, so I don't watch much video. And so I moderate it based on how am I doing and what am I interested in. I'm particularly keenly aware of the marine mammals here on the Pacific after Fukushima, particularly.
Yes.
I watch those things that matter to me. And I also, how do I say this? How do I keep myself open? How do I keep myself inspired?
Yes.
Well, I keep myself, one of the first things that inspires me is being in touch with the people that we meet in peak moment. Yes. We get the blessing of, we chose, for folks that haven't been acquainted with peak moment, most of our shows are about people doing constructive action that's inspiring, that's gives us some real options. A small percentage are about the predicament.
Right.
Or Guy McPherson. I couldn't continue if our whole show were in Democracy Now! Flavor of here's what's all going wrong. I'd drown. I couldn't make it through. So as we meet people, we're on the road, getting to meet people in person, get to be part of their community for a while. I am inspired at the level of creativity, imagination, inspiration, potential solutions. I feel like we are watching the post-industrial culture, the seeds for that starting to happen. Hugely.
Yes, indeed.
And that's upfront and personal. But I'm also inspired to read things like I like to read what Yes Magazine digs up, and some of the real options that you bring where people, or on shareable.net is something I keep an eye on for people who are forging other possibilities, even though they're small. Because I believe that even ideas have power. Even if somebody comes up with an inspiring idea and hasn't made it manifest yet, it may inspire someone else to do it or do something like it. And I'm so grateful for the internet as a way that we can spread that. Those are inspiring to me. And I'm inspired by my own community. We've got people who are working to save the salmon and defend against more intrusion.
Well, speaking of your own community, how do you stay connected with yourself, your deeper self, with others, and with the earth?
Well, connection is just another word for love.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of flavors of it. How I stay connected to myself and the deeper part of myself, one is by being immersed in nature.
Yes.
Almost always, looking at the Milky Way at night reminds me of sort of the scale of things here, and that my little concerns are small, can be seen small in light of that. But being immersed here in nature is like my big healer. When we came back from a pretty stressful 19 months, it was being on our land, being with the daily rhythm, watching the light and dark change. That's a big piece of being connected for me. But I also stay connected through my artwork. I've done canvas painting. In fact, one of my favorites is a piece where I've got the hands like this over a pond, and they're hills. I call it earth hands. And it feels to me a real image of how nature really does care to nurture us. But when we're on the road, I just carry my watercolors and I just sit and draw, a watercolor of a trees or a flower or a sunset. Those also keep me connected, grounded, being in my body, and being with the natural world that's a source for me. Music is another piece of what keeps me connected, actually helps me be in touch with my feelings. And brings comfort. I have a piece that we maybe can play at the end called Witch Hazel, whose words I want to read actually, because when I am really grieving, I find myself singing lyrics to songs that I'm talking to myself. Mm-hmm. This little chorus to the song goes, I tell my heart to be strong like the witch hazel flower, and you will not be damaged by this dark and troubled time. So music, listening to it as well as the words, are a piece of what I get comfort from, that keep me connected to those feelings. I'm an inconsistent meditator, but just stopping and breathing like that is something that also keeps me connected. Connected with others, I have to say my primary relationship with Robin is a big gift. Mm-hmm. Big gift. That's my primary relationship with humans in face. And the fact that she gets it, she supports it, she's the video behind the peak moment, all of that. And even if she doesn't want to hear the details, because she feels it even more deeply than I do, she doesn't want to hear all the little details of what's breaking. The fact that she's there, the fact that we are working together to do what we can to hopefully inspire the people, that's a way I stay connected. But I'm also connected with the people watching our show. We get comments on YouTube, and I know there are plenty of people watching it by the numbers who may not write, but it's connecting. And let me think if there's anything else. The other two things is that I write in my journal. That's one of my best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have done a little bit to feel less, how do you say, feel more comfortable about dying, the dying process.
Mm-hmm.
I did a workshop on the dying process and a book called The Gift, is that right? The Grace in Dying. Both have been helpful to make that a less fearful possibility,
Mm-hmm.
which seems closer given the predicament. So those are some of the ways that I try and stay connected.
Beautiful, Janaia. Thank you for those. I have one last question that I want to ask you. Is there any suggestion that you might offer our viewers regarding practices and ways to stay connected and to stay aware and open-hearted?
You know, you had asked that question earlier, and I keep thinking of more and more and more. And I think the one I'm going to answer first is sort of, to me, the foundation for others. And one is pay attention to being healthy.
Yes.
Health, the good food that we, real food, eat real food, real
Right.
food, vegetables and organic, and visit the farmers markets, and because those are inspiring alone, the colors are inspiring, is our connection to the environment and our way of helping to have the future be more sustainable. That, with that basis, then I think the other thing is to not go it alone. I think it's really valuable to have friends who can at least hear your heart. They may not agree with your point of view. They may not think that human collapse, extinction may happen soon, or climate change is real. But if they can hear us, I think that, and all the better if you have somebody who gets it, because they just support each other. I mean, that's really the ideal, and it doesn't need to be a lot of people. I have a few friends that I stay in touch with email-wise, who just sort of sometimes are just a nice balance. They send links, but they also remind me, like, of course, this is part of the crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
This looks dismayingly bad. Whatever this news is, it's dismaying, but it's part of the crumbling. Why should we be surprised? So I think the friendships are a big piece of that. And the other, because it's so rich for me, is finding some time, some way to connect with the natural world, because that's where we come from. That's our home.
Yes.
And even if in the city, I would be, when we are in cities, we find ways to walk, to watch the trees shedding leaves, if we can see the stars, to see some. So those are all grounding, I think. Friends, nature. And if I were a young person, what I'd advise is learn some skills, some practical skills, physical, hands-on skills. And if I had a message for the boomers, I would say it's our turn to share. Share what we know, share our homes, share our land, whatever it is we can. It's our time to share, because we're holding a lot of values.
Well, I recently interviewed Kevin Hester, who's a climate activist in New Zealand, and he talked about, his advice to young people is learn how to grow things, make things, fix things, and cook things.
I like that. That's perfect.
Yeah, I do too.
My life was very, very similar. The skills that Robin and I have learned by being more self-reliant, by being off-grid, we have had to learn construction and plumbing and electrical and food preservation. And though we don't grow food, I can preserve everything, And so I think his advice is perfect.
Yes, I do too.
Perfect.
I'd like to finish now, Janaia, with a poem. And you and I both love this poem. It's by Rashani, who is a female poet who lives I think, on the Big Island of Hawaii. And it's called The Unbroken. The Unbroken. There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside, which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing. Thank you so much for being with us on this symposium, Going Beyond Hope. I so appreciate you and Robin and the work you're doing, and appreciate your opening your heart to us at this time.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
I am looking at a witch hazel blooming in the garden, bright yellow flowers in the middle of winter time. And I tell my heart, be strong like the witch hazel flower, and you will not be injured by this dark and troubled time. You will not be injured by this dark and troubled time.